My name is Matt Rail and I'm the owner of Serrano Creek Soil Limits. During my day I receive a wide range of phone calls from folks about how to use compost in their gardens. And it seems in the last few years, as we've been transitioning to irrigation systems that conserve more water, that at the same time more folks are just not getting the results with our product that they historically have been getting. So I've made this video as a way of trying to explain the role between water conservation irrigation systems, compost, soil health, and plant vitality. The answers for this video come from my own experience here in my own yard, where I use a variety of irrigation systems, as well as visiting many of your gardens and seeing how you irrigate. If you stay to the end of this video, you'll definitely have a much better understanding of what goes on underground, how that underground is affected by the type of irrigation you use, and ultimately the vitality of your garden. So let's get started. If you think dirt is only made up of rock and sand and clay, how wrong you are. Living in that dirt are literally trillions of organisms. And it is their presence that converts the organic matter on the surface, those leaves, that bison manure, into food that feeds your plants. And the amount of life that exists underground is orders of magnitude much more dense than would exist above ground. But because we live above ground, we give little thought what happens below ground. So I'm going to change your terminology. Going forward, dirt is what stains your genes, but plants live in soil. So soil is the dirt portion, the rock, the sand, the clays, but it's also the water, organic matter, and the organisms. And we use that term soil. Understanding this relationship is so important that you may want to stop this video right now and watch one of the two videos I've shown on the screen. Now it's possible that video may expire when you actually watch this, but no doubt you'll find other videos by Dr. Elaine Gingham and Jeffrey Lowenfels that really give you a true appreciation of how complex and how important the organisms that live in your soil are to the success of your plants. So let's look at a natural cross-section of soil. We start with dirt. And on top of that dirt is some layer of organic matter, meaning some sort of carbon-based matter. It could be from fallen leaves, buffalo manure, or maybe compost we made from our kitchen scraps. Into that, a few seedlings have sprouted. There's a large fungal mass associated with the roots of our little seedlings, so we're going to put those in. That there are billions of bacteria that break down the organic matter that helps feed the soil organisms. And just for graphic purposes, we're going to add some amoebas and earthworms and centipedes and pill bugs, just to name a few. And all of these organisms either feed from the organic matter that's on the surface or secondarily feed from those who bring it into the soil. And very important, these organisms, just like you and I, require water to survive as well as to move about. So let's see what happens. In our simple graphic, it rains, and that rain travels through the surface organic matter into the soil below. And while this may seem very elementary, when this organic matter is wet enough, a few of our worms and pill bugs, etc., will move into it, consume it, and then bring it into the soil. Also, very important to remember that soil must have moisture for those organisms that live in the soil to remain alive. When there's a dry area, the organisms either die or move away from there. If you think to an earlier time in our lives, our home irrigation systems were pretty close to natural rainfall. Looking at our graphic, we can see that while it is not truly rainfall coming from the sky, these robust sprinkler systems were able to wet everything and provide the moisture content the soil organisms needed to continue on. So in the first step towards water conservation, we took the same concept of these overhead sprinklers and reduced them to much smaller versions of the larger ones. So if we look at our graphic, we see what happens when we start using these sort of micro spray systems. So how does that soil change when we go from the old standard above ground water everything method to these new microsystems? What we see is that we start to get dry spots in between the various sprinklers. As these become more pronounced, the soil organisms leave these dry areas. Total population falls, and hence eventually less nutrients are available for the plants. While we may change our sprinkler system all in one day, the drying of these areas could take months, maybe more if we go through a few rainstorms. And we will likely go through a honeymoon period where the plants are thriving but with so much less water. How wonderful a new irrigation system is. That's a false economy because eventually those dry spots will start to form. You will also notice that portions of the surface organic matter are no longer wet. And without this moisture, the very organisms that were consuming it will leave for wet areas. Their numbers will dwindle as the amount of damp compost is reduced. The dry organic matter will no longer support a vibrant soil. It will become hard and brittle. And it makes sense that you would think, hey, the reason my yard's not doing well is because this compost is terrible. Let's look at a simple chart comparing damp areas versus dry areas. So first we begin with a natural setting or our old-fashioned thoroughly irrigated area. And with plenty of water, the bacteria and fungi flourish. Their byproducts open up the soil, allowing oxygen and water to easily get to those organisms that live in the soil, and hence those produce more nutrients for our plants and everything's looking good. Now let's look what happens when we turn off the water. The bacteria and fungi die off and soil structure begins to collapse. As it collapses, it becomes more compacted. Oxygen and water cannot get to the organisms, and soon anaerobic organisms colonize the soil. Their byproducts don't create plant food, but instead create poisons such as alcohols and acids, which eventually either stress or kill our above-ground plants. Remember, all this takes time, months or years after an irrigation system is changed. In soil, dry means dead. Back to our irrigation story. In an effort to save more water, we've moved from these micro-spraying systems to drip systems. By now you realize that the volume of soil that supports a plant can be hundreds of times larger than the above-ground plant. Yet somehow we believe that a single or a few dripping emitters can support a thriving soil does not make sense. As we see with these systems, the dry zone is further increased. So how do these systems get installed if they don't make sense? I think it's because we view the world through our own experiences, and when we're thirsty, we can meet all our water needs through a very small pore called our mouth. But as we know, plants do not absorb water this way. They require a very large diffuse area. If you took time to watch either of those two videos, you've come to understand it takes a lot of soil to support a plant in an area far, far larger than what we see above ground. I have visited struggling gardens where the homeowner is baffled by what is going on. That's because they have converted from traditional systems that watered all the soil to maybe one or two emitters placed at the base of a very mature tree. And as we see, this cannot possibly work. Continuing with our irrigation story, inline drip systems. By these few photos, we can see these wet versus dry areas. And these systems suffer from the same problem as conventional systems with large dry areas. So here's another effect we need to look at, changing soil composition. So we may have installed an over-designed drip system that did in fact water all of our soil, but recently it seems like our plants are really struggling. As we saw earlier, it could be that there was leftover soil moisture from the old system that took a while to be used up. But another explanation could be that we've worked hard to improve the organic levels in the soil, and that very action has damaged the efficiency of this system. So let's see how that happens. If we compare clay and sandy soil, they're very different. Clay soils tend to be very compacted, so that water is very slow to sink in. Hence, water will tend to spread over a greater area before it soaks into the soil. On the other hand, sandy soils are very porous, meaning that there's a lot of space between the particles, a lot of room for water to go in. In these soils, water soaks in very quickly. If you look at a cross-section, you will see two different wetting patterns from these two types of soil. Another factor is capillary action. Because of the skin effect of a water molecule, in clay, water can travel sideways as well as upwards, defying gravity. In very porous soils, that skin effect is greatly diminished, so water moves down. So now let's look at a drip system that was built for a yard that was all clay. Initially, it worked very well in terms of distributing water. That's because it had capillary action. Over time, either organic matter is added from falling leaves, or we've begun adding compost to the surface. Whatever the reason is, the soil has become more porous, which is great for the organisms that live there because now they can get water and oxygen. But unfortunately, the drip system's water distribution narrows as the soil's porosity increases and capillary action is reduced. As our soil improves, ironically, we start to see those dreaded dry zones beginning to form. Over time, as more organic matter enters the soil, the drip system becomes less and less capable of providing the needed moisture. Now we know that pure clay soil is of little value, that we must add organic matter. So keeping our soil sterile is not the answer. Ironically, if one relies on these systems, the answer is using only synthetic fertilizers injected into the irrigation water. Any and all organic matter must be avoided to maximize the clay content and foster this spreading of water. So how can we have both? How can we have lush, healthy gardens as well as conserve water? Hopefully by now you see that watering the entire garden soil and not just the base of the plant is the key to a healthy underground soil, and that healthy soils foster healthy plants. That's something we cannot get around. The easiest and most cost-effective solution to conserving water is to mulch over the entire surface. As much as 50% of that soil moisture can be lost to evaporation from the sun and the wind. This is especially true with clay soils, where that darn capillary action will draw moisture from deep down, bring it to the surface, where it is then lost to evaporation. A layer of compost stops that capillary draw by shading the soil from the sun, as well as blocking the drying effects of wind. So either mulch with 3 to 4 inches of compost, or just leave any fallen organic matter where it fell. Second, if you have a drip system buried, raise those emitters up onto the surface. The reason we do this is we want our organic matter on the surface to be wet enough so that the organisms will consume it and integrate it into the soil. If we bury that line, the compost will become extremely dry and never get into the soil to feed the organisms that eventually feed the plants. Again, remember that all the soil needs to have moisture. Putting water where there are no plants does not mean you are wasting water. Shake yourself of that drinking glass analogy. If you have an inline drip system, consider adding additional lines. In my vegetable garden, I initially installed this system exactly as detailed in the manual. I've since gone back and have added twice the recommended number of lines. With these additional lines, I also chose an emitter with a much higher flow rate, so that the water would pool and spread rather than soaking just below the emitter. The results have been spectacular, and my bumper crops are back. Another feature I've added is a weather-based irrigation timer. Now be forewarned, these can be pretty expensive and are quite complicated to program, but the water savings can be worth the price. Hey, watering when it rains is a pure waste, but who remembers to run out and turn off our irrigation system when that happens? Then there are the cases when there's a heat spell and we see our plants wilting, so we do adjust the time upwards. The heat spell passes, but we forget to reset our timing schedule, and as a result we overwater. So that concludes a few of my thoughts about watering and compost. I hope you've gotten a little bit better understanding and can make more informed decisions going forward. Your patience has been most appreciated, and of course, your calls are always welcome. Thank you.